There we go. All right. Good morning, everybody. And welcome to day 3. This has been super exciting so far, and I'm so looking forward to the rest of all of our presenters, and especially Sarah's today. And welcome to the first Humans Connecting with Horses conference. And when I say first, that sometimes scares me, because when I say first in Equine Leadership, that generally means we're going to keep doing it. Just as the magazine started 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and we're on our 5th edition now. I didn't know when I started it that it was going to grow into what it did. So we have over 100 participants and from all over the world, and we're just thrilled to be here and be sharing with you and sharing the voice and the wisdom of the horse, because this is really what this is all about. It's about the horse and that horse-human connection. Technical stuff, just if we can stay off video and audio until Sarah asks you to come back on. Sarah's going to direct this. I am going to sit back and enjoy. Thank you, Sarah. And with that being said, I would like to introduce you to Sarah Schlotta, and I'm just going to pass it over to you, Sarah, to work your magic.
All right. Thanks so much, Linda. I really appreciate being here. Thanks everybody for coming. We've got a really fun morning planned, really interesting. I hope you'll leave with some new insights and perhaps more questions than answers, but that's probably what every good presentation does, is leave you wanting more and being curious about more also. I want to apologize first off for the graininess of the video. I am in my basement right now because I'm in the process of selling my home, and the upstairs is in the process of being painted. And I had to coordinate with the painters as to where I would be and when this morning while this is happening. So it's the lighting is a little funny, but we're going to do the best that we can and get the ball rolling here. So some of you know me already. Some of you I'm connected with on social media. Some of you are new. So as Linda said, I'm Sarah Schlotta, and I'm a psychotherapist in private practice in Guelph, Ontario, Canada. And soon to be moving across the country. I had some exciting news happen last week, so I'm just about in the process to move back to British Columbia for a really interesting and exciting opportunity in a horses and healings program that's happening in BC. So I will be sharing more about that on social media in the coming week or so. But you're getting me live from my basement today. And I'm the founder of EQUUSOMA, which is a horse-human trauma recovery model that looks at how human stuff and horse stuff intersect in a variety of contexts. So it's not just in equine-assisted psychotherapy and learning, or equine-facilitated psychotherapy and learning, et cetera, that whole field, but also in the context of horse-human relationships in general. How does our stuff and the horse's stuff intersect and get entangled? And how do we start to pick that stuff apart? And there's lots of different pieces that are part of that kind of picking apart. And so today I wanted to go through a little bit of that because it's really, really relevant. And I think in this day and age, as we're getting more aware of the science and we're coming back to some of the long ancestrally held knowledge and wisdom that has been around for eons, I think it's interesting how that stuff comes together and how we can start to apply it in more intentional and concrete ways. So, and not just in the fields of EAPL and EFPL, but also horsemanship, instruction, riding, coaching, horse training, equine behavior consultation, equine healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So this information is really vast. I like to describe it like going down a rabbit hole, you know, down to Wonderland. The minute you start opening up the rabbit hole, there's so much more to know. So today will be a little small taster of 3 areas that I find are really, really important to become aware of in ourselves and in the horses that we're interacting with, regardless of your context, so that we can have more fulfilling and supportive and satisfying relationships with one another. So what I'm going to do, since Zoom webinars are pretty familiar for me, Linda will take care of admitting people into the meeting room as necessary. We're not going to do breakout rooms today. It'll largely be me inviting you to have curiosity about your own experience in relation to the topics that I'm talking about. And I'll give a few resources for further exploration. And there will also be some resources on the page for where the links are located. And on the YouTube video, there will be additional links also for some of the handouts and resources that come along with this presentation. So without further ado, I'm going to bring up my share screen here and get the slides going. And we are going to share. And start. Okay. So, as you all know, our topic for today, this morning rather, is my stuff, your stuff, what comes up in the space between horses and humans. And I really like this topic as it's so broad and at the same time super duper specific. So let's see if we can give you a little dip of a toe into a really cool swimming pool this morning. So as we go to begin, I'd invite you, if you were planning on taking notes and so on, you still can. But for this brief practice that we're going to do right now, I would highly encourage you to, if you want, like put your pens down, paper down. If you had a tablet that you were taking notes on, feel free to put that aside for just a brief moment. And we're going to bring your awareness into just allowing yourself to be right here, right now. And if you allow yourself to just settle and notice what's supporting you to be present, notice what happens on the inside for you as you bring your attention to that. And you can do this awareness practice, eyes open, if that's easier for you, or eyes closed. You're not going to miss much on the screen. And in fact, if it helps, I'm going to actually stop the stop share here. I'm going to bring it back to us. So as you're settling into what's supporting you to be present right now, whatever that is, that could be something that's holding you up, the chair that you're sitting on, a bed that you might be lying on. It could even be what supports you internally to be present. If there's an anchor within yourself that you like to bring your attention to, that helps you to just be here right now. Wherever you are in this moment. And this awareness practice is more about becoming present. If you, in becoming present, notice that you're a little activated or a little revved up or a little distracted, then that's what you become present to. And then you just get to notice that. If in the process of this little practice right now, you find yourself becoming more settled, notice what that's like. Notice what shifts inside. As you take a moment to just orient to where you are right now. And whatever supports you to be present, aware, and comfortable. And if there's anything that you need to do, if you notice any impulse inside you to adjust your position, adjust your posture, or add in pillows or a blanket to make yourself more comfortable, feel free to do so. I'm going to adjust myself on my chair. And as I do that, I notice a really big breath happen inside of me that just sort of took itself spontaneously. And there was just a slight edge in my stomach that seems to be easing off as I bring my attention to my own chair. So as you're doing this, as you're bringing your attention to whatever supports you and whatever feels comfortable right now, I invite you to bring your attention, to call to mind a relationship with a horse. Could be your horse, could be someone else's horse, but a relationship with a particular horse that is challenging. And see if you can recall that in your mind's eye, the impression or the image of that horse or that interaction with that horse. And as you do that, bring in as much detail as you have available to you. You know, if there's what you can see, what you can hear, what you can feel or sense with your body. Sensory details. And when you picture that relationship and that horse, what do you notice happens inside? And when I say inside, there might be different things that you're aware of. You might be aware of bodily sensations that shift and change in response to thinking about this horse and your interactions with it. Scan your body, notice what sensations you're aware of. If there's tightening or pulsing, throbbing, a sense of heat, whatever you notice. Notice if things are speeding up or slowing down. Also notice if there's any thoughts, words, beliefs that come along with the image or the impression of the relationship with this horse. Any feelings, as in emotions, sad, disappointed, guilty, upset, angry, confused, longing. And notice if there's any behavior that comes along with that, any impulse in your body to move in a particular way, any facial expression that you make. And so as you're sitting with this, again, notice what the overall experience is as you picture your relationship with this horse. If you notice any sensations, feel free to just notice those in your body. And as you notice the sensations with kind attention, just see what happens next if you hang out at the edges of those sensations. You can do this eyes open or eyes closed. Go to where there is the smallest amount that feels tolerable. And notice what happens when you place your focus there. Be curious if the sensations begin to dissipate or if they escalate further. And just holding that with curiosity. But what supports them to either dissipate or escalate? What adds in there? And though almost as if we're changing film reels, we'll take that film reel off the projector screen and the projecting machine, and we'll put on another film reel. And I'd invite you to imagine a relationship with a horse that feels much more comfortable, or in which you experience more ease. And then as you picture this scene, bringing in as much detail as possible that you can see, that you can hear, that you can sense or touch with your body. As you picture that scene or an image that represents that relationship, what do you notice happens inside this time? Notice any sensations in your body, any thoughts, words. Notice if there's any emotion, any impulse towards a particular movement. Notice what happens inside this time as you sit with that, the image or the impression of that relationship. What's different inside? And it might be that you have a relationship with a horse that is a mix of the two, which is probably more often the case. And as you picture a relationship with a horse that might have the two, see if you can notice what you're most aware of as you notice that relationship. Is it more the activating, challenge, difficulty stuff? Or is it the ease, the places where things feel more flowy, more cohesive, more coherent, more satisfying? Do you tend to be in one more than the other as you think about this relationship? And just notice with curiosity. So, coming back around, if you make your way back from the movie theater that we were kind of in there for a moment, and you take the last reel off, if you want to add to the chat box, I'll offer just a few moments for observations. If you're willing to share what you noticed in the scenarios, you don't have to say what the relationship with the horse is, whose horse it is, go into all the details, but what did you notice? If you're willing to share, just in the chat box below. Or if you want to share out loud, by unmuting yourselves or putting yourselves into video mode, feel free to do so. And we'll just sort of take a few comments here and there before I move into the material for today, if anyone's wanting to share. I'll just give a few moments for people to type if necessary. I hear a voice coming in. Let me move us to gallery view. Who's that? I think someone just unmuted themselves. Or maybe not. Maybe that was by accident. Everyone's quiet this morning. No one's had their morning coffee yet. You all have the right to choice to pass. So there's no obligation to share what you're noticing inside, if that doesn't feel comfortable for you. One person just did. So Susan says tight hands, resistance, walls, hot, heavy, and then spacious, spreading, heart open. Yeah, very different. Yeah, very different. I'm sure you're not alone in some of that experience. I was thinking of some of the relationships I have with my own horses and how there's elements of both in those relationships and having the two at the same time. Sue says accelerated heartbeat and then peace. Okay, yeah. Anyone else have anything they want to share about what they noticed? Wild Ways Therapy says noticing how the horse is a bridge to the human owner or where the challenge is. Yeah, totally. Horses, I often find, are in the therapy world, we'll talk about the identified patient. And so often in family therapy, for instance, the child is the one that's yanked off to therapy to say, my child has issues, blah, blah, blah. Can you make my child better? When in reality, the child is symptomatic of the family and what's going on in the parenting scenario or the family at large and society at large. And so, so the horse often can be reflective of that as well. We often will make the horse the identified patient, when in reality, it's more complicated than that. And Dufour says possibilities, excitement, and peace. think I already mentioned that one. Eileen says self-doubt to appreciation. Yeah, lovely. Thanks everyone for your willingness to share this morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to return to the screen. And let me just get back into screen share here. So a few basic principles to lead us off with today. So one is a quote from the folks who developed a model called natural lifemanship. And I like this quote from them. They say, just as we would never think of a relationship with a person to be a metaphor, our relationships with horses are not metaphors either, but are real relationships. I say quite often, trauma shows up in every relationship room and round pen. And then this is a really common quote also, we are hurt in relationships and we can heal in relationships as well. And so this is where we're going to be coming from today. So when we think about what comes up in relationship, and this is human to human, but also horse to horse and then human to horse, you know, there's a lot of things that come up between horses and humans. And I'm wondering if anyone is willing to add into the chat box what they notice comes up in these kinds of relationships. Like what of our stuff is present in the context of a horse-human relationship, and what of the horse is present? What do we know is available or shows up in the space? There's a lot that shows up in the space between us. And so while you're reflecting on some of those questions, I'll speak a little bit to the fact that our relationships are either going to feel connected or nourishing, or they're going to feel disconnected and destabilizing, or sometimes just dissatisfying in general, right? And often those patterns, the state of our relationships reflects the degree to which we are aware or not aware of our stuff, their stuff, and how the stuff intermingles. And so let me just pull up the chat box here. We've got a few people who are commenting. Let me see here. Yeah, so Wild Ways Therapy says material beyond our conscious awareness often, yeah, right? We have blind spots, and it's not about faulting ourselves for our blind spots, and it's about having a healthy appreciation for the fact that we do have them, right? Even if we don't know what they are. Diane talks about fear and trust. Yeah, Susan says frustration, patience, checking out, distraction, presence or being, acceptance, intention or lack thereof. Tara Louise says mirrors. Interesting. So there's without wanting to get too nitpicky about language, there's a particular movement in the field of equine-assisted psychotherapy and learning that says that horses are not just a mirror that reflect us back to ourselves. It's an actual relationship, right? And so it's more than just the blank slate of the horse pinging our stuff back to us, and that the horse is a metaphor, or the horse is you know, an analogy for our everyday lives, but this is an actual relationship in the here and now, right? And so what I like to talk about, instead of using the language of mirrors, is the language of we're pinging off of each other. Right? A mirror kind of implies that, like, a mirror is on a wall. A mirror is a flat, two-dimensional surface. You know, you don't have a relationship with a mirror, but we do ping off of each other with like sonar, right? And so the idea is, how do we really recognize this idea of relationship beyond just a mirror that's reflecting us sort of transparently back to ourselves? That mirror actually is a living, breathing being that has its own history. Anne says, doors opening, possibilities again, taking us outside the box. Right, exactly. So let's talk a little bit more about what takes us outside the box. So I'm going to close this box here, speaking of boxes. So this little presentation is going to underscore the importance of being trauma informed. And so what do I mean by that? So this does not mean that you need to be a trauma therapist, right? Most people who have horses are not therapists. And most people who do work with horses are not necessarily therapists either. So you don't have to be a trauma therapist to have a lens that is trauma informed. It's a way through which to understand behavior. And as is often stated in the trauma-informed care literature, it's not about what's wrong with you. It's what's happened to you, how you've adapted or coped or adjusted to survive, and then also what's possible in terms of healing and well-being moving forward, both individually and collectively. Healing is not just an individual experience where we work at the individual level, but we also have to work at the collective levels to create the external conditions that allow individuals to thrive regardless of species. So it's not just a, hey, let's yank you off and get you healed and not deal with the systemic issues that are also available and present. And of course, being trauma-informed involves the application of specific principles. And so in the trauma-informed care literature, you're going to see language like this repeated everywhere over and over again. So consent, safety, choice, voice, empowerment, trust, collaboration, and compassion are all principles that support a trauma-informed approach. And so we're wanting to approach the material today from this place of choice and safety and consent and empowerment and collaboration and trust, and especially compassion. I'll come back around to compassion a lot throughout the course of this presentation. So what comes up in the space between us, right? Horses and humans have a lot going on, right? There's a history of experiences that we have that is both what we might call proximal. So proximal is sort of the immediate experiences with our own existing day. There's more distal experiences, which are further back in time. You know, the further back we go, the more distal experiences are. And then of course, there's going to be experiences that are ancestral, right? And that leads us to recognizing that we all have our own epigenetic imprinting. Epigenetics are how our gene expression changes and adjusts according to our life experiences and the life experiences of our ancestors. So it's not that the genes themselves change per se, but how the genes are expressed is impacted by environmental relational conditions over time. We all have a nervous system, right? We have attachment patterns, we've got personality traits, we have states that our physiology go through on a regular basis that shift. We have management strategies. Those are the different ways that we've learned how to cope and adjust to try to manage as well as we can in the world according to our circumstances. We have behaviors, we have health conditions, and all this stuff comes together in many, many nuanced and complex ways. And this, of course, for those of us who are in the field of equine assisted, whatever you want to call it, this is pretty much taken as a given. This is not always necessarily in the awareness of, say, a horse trainer or an equine, you know, a horsemanship instructor, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so sometimes it is, and sometimes some of the nuances are not always present. So we're going to try to get into some of the nuances today. And actually, just to say that, to be fair, not everyone in the field of equine assisted psychotherapy and learning is also aware of all these things playing out as well. Because again, blind spots, right? We all have those. So the goal here is to see if we can shed some light into some shadowy areas that we are not always paying attention to. So the first question I always like to ask is drawing from Martin Buber's work, who was an existential philosopher and writer who talked about the difference between an I-it relationship and an I-thou relationship. And for me, the I-it relationship is sort of the language of the horse is my mirror, where it's like, okay, yes, this is what's going on. But there's also the I-thou relationship, which is, okay, but what's also going on for the horse, and can we bring that into the equation in a pinging sort of way? And so is it also, other wording for this is this a one-sided relationship or a two-sided relationship? What is going on in both directions? And there's multiple layers, as we all know, right? There's so many layers that we can pay attention to. And this gets to be really, really heavy, of course, because we're going to miss stuff and we're going to have blind spots about stuff. So it's really, really important that we approach what we don't know or what we don't see with curiosity and compassion with and about one another as we are entering into this topic. So some of the stuff, horses and humans ping off of each other all the time, right? To use the pinging language that one of my teachers, Kathy Kane, talks about a lot. And I'm going to pick 3 of the pingings today we'll see how much we get through. 3 may have been ambitious. But we're going to do a brief overview. This is like a small taster. This is not necessarily the be all and end all heavy thesis of this content, but really just a smidgen or an appetizer, as it were. So we're going to look a little bit at attachment styles, nervous system patterns, and ego states of the personality, and get a better sense of how those things play out in the context of horse-human relationships. So there are, and this is again going to be short crash course, not meant to be completely all-inclusive, but when we look at attachment styles or attachment patterns, this is the work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. So there's secure attachment, and then there's 3 categories of insecure attachment. So we have insecure avoidant, insecure anxious, and insecure disorganized. And then there's a 5th category called earned secure. And so secure attachment is when the conditions of attachment were met, and I, or an organism, could be a horse as well, those conditions were met, and so development occurred in the way it's sort of intended to, right? So there were safe haven conditions, and there was a secure base to return to within that safe haven condition in order to feel supported, experience co-regulation, get reassured, and so on. So secure attachment occurs through repeated, consistent, reliable interactions with caregivers who attend to our needs, attune to us accurately enough, and repair when there are ruptures that occur in the attunement, because that's going to happen. And so when those conditions are largely met, not perfectly, but good enough, we can say that an individual has secure attachment. Secure attachment would be where I trust in the relationship, even when I'm not present with my partner or I'm not present with my attachment figure. And I trust that that relationship is solid, it's there, I can turn to it, and I can lean into it willingly when necessary, right? Insecure avoidant would be an organism that tends to dismiss relationships or downplay the need for relationships, tends to be very much more aloof, withdrawn, pulls away, copes in relationship by being very almost excessively independent and proud of their independence and not needing anyone or anything. Be sort of classic insecure avoidant pattern. Insecure anxious pattern would be a person, or could also be an animal, right? Because attachment theory is not specific to humans. This is actually a mammalian-based theory, because it has been shown in multiple other species as well, not just us. Anxious attachment would be an organism that is really worried, preoccupied with the attachment figure and the relationship when the attachment figure is not around, worried that the person or the other is no longer available for them, and engages in a lot of, they do the reverse of the avoidant person. They do a lot more seeking of relationships, clinging, looking for reassurance, sort of actively seeking connection, but in an anxious and worried sort of way, as opposed to seeking connection from a secure place. So, and there's a lot of protesting of separation with someone or another animal that is anxiously attached. Disorganized usually has a combination of the two, right? Tendency to have avoidant traits and anxious traits. It's kind of like confused attachment, because the thing that I want is also the thing that scares me, right? I'm really drawn to wanting connection and closeness, but I'm concerned about what will happen if I do. And will I be harmed if I do? Will I be rejected? And often disorganized patterning reflects a history of early trauma. Not that trauma can't occur for avoidant and anxious also. But that often is reflective of the disorganized pattern, where it's like, I want you and I need you to go away. There's this sort of push-pull. I'm really drawn to you and it's scary at the same time. Earned secure is exactly what it sounds like. Earned secure is when we have worked on our insecure patterning, and we have gotten to a place in our own attachment stuff that we are able to have developed a security in particular relationships. It doesn't mean that it's going to be perfect, and it certainly doesn't mean that when the shit hits the fan or there's moments that are challenging or stressful, that we don't revert back into an insecure pattern under really extenuating circumstances. And again, when I say we, I also involve horses in this, right? So Some questions would be, perhaps this, we could go back to the chat box, but what would insecure attachment in a horse-human relationship look like, either in terms of behaviors, relational expectations, emotions, thoughts, and bodily sensations? Obviously, we might not know the horse's bodily sensations, but what might your bodily sensations be? What do you notice? What would that look like? Like, how could you tell a relationship with a horse might be characterizable as insecure, whether avoidant or anxious or disorganized? What might that look like? I'll give you a moment to sit with that. Consider the patterning. Who is doing the pursuing in the relationship? Is there someone doing the distancing in the relationship? Are you both distant? Are you both pursuing? Okay, we've got some chat box coming up here. Let me just pull that up. Diane said, wanting to be with the horse, but being afraid at the same time. Yeah. Francine, insecure, anxious, unable to set boundaries. Yeah, that's right. There's a great example. So insecure, anxious pattern would be a tendency to let everyone and anything in, right? It's like, I so want connection. I so want reassurance. I'm going to let it all in, even though it might not be good for me, because I just want that. I want that closeness, and a tendency to sometimes interpret excessive closeness as a good thing, right? Anxious would be, I think, the polar opposite of that tendency to have very rigid boundaries and have a lot of very strict stipulations around what boundaries look like. Any other examples? What about in terms of relational expectations? What are the relationship expectations or beliefs that come up with the various secure and insecure patterning? Linda says, pushing the horse away, then taking it personally. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh. Or the horse walking away and taking it personally, right? That could happen, right? Yeah. What else might it look like? What are some of these expectations? Like, that are unspoken, right? This is putting words into things that we don't normally think about, but what would be the unspoken voice of an anxious relationship? What are the words there? Susan, I have to do everything right. Right, or else X, Y, and Z. If I don't do everything right, I will be rejected, I will be ridiculed, I'll be abandoned. And this is not just in relation to the horse, right? Remember, many people also board their horses at like a facility that's very public. I know when I started boarding my horses, when I first got into horses, I felt a lot of insecurity around doing anything with my horses, where other people who had more horse experience might watch me or see me. I was absolutely terrified. And so my anxious / avoidant sort of mixed pattern would show up, where it was like, I want you to like me, and I also am wanting to keep away because I don't know how this is going to be, you know? And then I had that also with my horses. Wild Ways Therapy says, apologizing repeatedly. Yeah, totally. Right. Yeah, exactly. Francine, expecting the horse to be happy to see me. Right. Yes. Right. And then taking it, again, like Linda said, taking it personally when the horse isn't happy, right? Interpreting behavior through a lens that reflects our own stuff, right? Another one that I often see is expecting the horse to meet my emotional needs. Like, I expect you to be my secure base, my safe haven. I expect you to co-regulate for me. These are not wrong things, by the way. These are, when we enter into relationship, we're looking for these things. Ultimately, we all do this. This is natural relationship behavior, you know. And but if left unchecked, we can inadvertently place the expectation on the other to be or do something for us. And when that's not owned in the space, then what happens in the relationship? Like, what starts to occur between horse and human when that unspoken need is there in the space, right? So things to think about. Linda says, anger at a horse for being fearful of something. Oh yeah. And then I often think to myself, so do you get angry at yourself for being fearful? You don't have to answer that question, Linda, it's more rhetorical. But, you know, is that the reaction you have towards yourself when you get scared, right? Is that what you experienced? Again, collective you, not just you, Linda, specifically, but like, did you experience anger from a caregiver, for instance, when you were afraid of something, right? And then we pass along how we were parented and how we relate to our horses. And sometimes that happens. Right? Any other examples? These are great, by the way. This is exactly what I was looking for. So I'll let you sit with that, because I'm going to pose another question on this slide, which is, so what would earned secure or secure look and feel like with a horse? Right? And if you were to visualize and sense what an earned or secure relationship looks like with a horse, what is different inside when you picture that? Like, what's different in terms of your sensations in your body, your emotions, your thoughts, any relational expectations you might have, any impulses towards specific behaviors? Susanna says, understanding and peace. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Susanna. Calm Confidence by Sue. Yeah, thank you. Free-flowing acceptance, no expectations, no program, just what's there. Yeah, exactly. And notice as you're naming all that, like what that's like in the body, right? What's different about your body right now as you're imagining a secure relationship, right? Supportive, opening, flowing, right? Very different felt sense in the body, right? Fluid, great word, right? Unconditional presence, regardless of context, honest, yeah. And how many of us can honestly raise our hands and say that we're doing this all the time, right? Not many, right? Even myself, right? And we all have off days. We're going to be human. We're not going to do this perfectly. But it's about being aware of it and how can we continually work at these pieces, right? Diane says, not taking the horse's actions personally, realizing that the horse has emotions too. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Great. So there's a few ways that you can explore your attachment pattern a little bit more. And so on this screen here, which you'll get the slides for after the presentation, I'll encourage you, if you're curious about this, there's an instrument on the internet that is called the Experiences in Close Relationship Scale, Relationship Structures. That's the link to it. You can sign up and get a free account and do the actual quiz and get your attachment pattern or attachment style as evaluated in 4 different relationships. And so I'm just going to sort of name a caveat here around the language of this instrument that's online. They've done a revised version of the ECR, but the one available at this website still uses non-inclusive language. So it assumes that you had a mother and a father. And that's not always going to be true for everyone. Some people have had 2 mothers, 2 fathers, non-binary parents, might have been raised by kin, grandparents, foster parents, etc., adopted, you know. And so it's going to ask you 4 different relationships and evaluate your attachment patterning in those 4 relationships. So if you didn't have a mom or you didn't have a dad, or that doesn't reflect your relationship, simply pick, like, if it's the mom category that you didn't have because you had 2 fathers, for instance, then just answer as if one was one father and one was the other father, and just disregard the label mom. Does that make sense? So answer in relation to your experience. Don't worry so much about the category. Just mentally remember that you've changed your category, okay? And then it says with a friend, and then it says with a romantic partner. If you do not have a current romantic partner, then obviously you can do it about a past relationship if that reflects better for you, okay? Because the interesting thing about your attachment style is that it doesn't it's not necessarily the same from relationship to relationship, right? And so the patterning will adjust or change depending on your experience of the other relationship and how you are in the world. There's another really great attachment styles quiz. And that's a fun one because it's done a little differently from the ECR. This one, the ECR was studied and validated through research. The attachment styles quiz is just a quiz that was developed by one of the somatic experiencing faculty members, Diane Poole-Heller, who also teaches a model called somatic attachment and looks at working with attachment styles from a somatic perspective. Very cool stuff. And that quiz looks at the percentages, like what percentage of you is secure, what percentage of you is avoidant, what percentage is anxious, etc. So it looks more at proportions as opposed to specific relationships. So it's kind of an interesting add on to that whole piece. And what I will hand out as an extra material that you'll get with the actual handouts is the equine attachment questionnaire that was developed by a few researchers a number of years ago. And so I've adjusted it. It was actually called the Pet Attachment Questionnaire, or the PAQ. And so I've adjusted it here for equine attachment questionnaire and just replace the word horse. So I'll have two versions for you that you can use. One is about you and your own horse, or a horse that you have a relationship with. And the other one will be for or a client could use in relation to a horse or their horse. And the other one is with regards to a horse trainer, with regards to a horse that it's working with, or a riding instructor with regards to a horse that they're teaching riding with, right? So I've adapted it twice over. So you will get that in the materials. And it's an easy to score test. It doesn't tell you if you're, I don't think it tells you specifics, but it will say if you are more anxious or more avoidant, I believe is where it goes. It looks more at anxious and avoidant attachment, and secure attachment doesn't really look at, I believe, disorganized so much, I'm pretty sure. So, and then of course this begs the question, how do you determine your horse's attachment style? And right now there is no one set standard for doing that. There is no one easy way to evaluating your horse's attachment patterning, either within its herd or with humans. Most of this is still really observational. And so what we look for in attachment, and attachment in research settings was evaluated using something called the strange situation study, where they had a mom and their baby go into a room with a researcher, and mom would leave and come back, and they would look at the response of the child to mom leaving and coming back. And they've done that same research with dogs and humans to look at attachment patterning in dogs and what are the indicators of secure, insecure attachment in dogs in those settings. They haven't formally done this with horses, to my knowledge. I'm aware of a couple of studies that look similar in structure, and if you're interested, I can certainly pass along those articles as well if you'd like. But usually we look at, I could imagine, and this is what's done with the other species, is looking at what are the safe haven conditions that you have provided as a human. Have you provided safe haven conditions to a horse? So safe haven conditions are, again, consistency, reliability, the ability to attune accurately and respond to what you're attuning to, right? And have that kind of consistent relationship where the conditions are, there's protection and there's connection and affiliation, and it feels reliable, right? Secure base, does the horse return to you when it's looking for support? Does it come to you for reassurance, etc. at times? Does it turn to you in various contexts? Proximity seeking, does the horse come near you? Does it seek you out for connection? And separation distress, does the horse, experience distress upon separation from you? Or and that doesn't necessarily mean that secure attachment would mean that the horse is distressed upon your departure. That's not what that means. That's more for in young children. What is going on here? Or I would even say, does the horse experience separation distress from its herd when you take it away from the herd, which might imply that there's a lack of secure attachment between you and the horse, potentially, right? Again, the jury is still out. This is all still very new in terms of research. A recent study that came out from researchers actually at the University of Guelph, near where I work, said that they did a study on looking at humans and their perception of the horse-human bond. And so this is based on report from the humans, their interpretation of a horse-human bond, not necessarily based on the conditions of attachment theory, include the horse approaching them, of course, a horse vocally greeting them. So sometimes the little nickering that you hear when the horse sees you approach, horse trusting a person in a dangerous situation, the horse taking care of them, and the horse initiating physical contact. So I've got a few questions here in the chat box. I'm just going to pull this up. Okay, just great. Thank you for joining us. Those of you who have to leave, that's totally fine. The recordings will be available shortly. So let's jump from attachment. because I want to be mindful of the time. So let's talk a little bit about another area of stuff that is common and that shows up in horse-human relationships, which is the nervous system patterning, which we can't separate out from attachment very much. These things all kind of dovetail and come together. So, of course, as we said earlier, horses and humans have a nervous system that's shaped by a whole bunch of things, right? Including sociopolitical, cultural, economic, and other systemic injustices and factors. I mean, the context in which we develop affects how we develop. And so, as Dr. Bruce Perry likes to say, you know, if the input into the relationship is cohesive and organized and regulating and so on, then the output in the relationship is going to be coherent and stabilized and regulated and flowing, et cetera, et cetera. And so what goes in is what tends to come out. And this is also true for the nervous system. So nervous systems do respond in a somewhat predictable way in response to whether what Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory calls neuroception of safety, danger, or life threat. And if we feel safe, we're going to have a different set of behaviors, a different set of options essentially available to us than if we feel that we are in danger or if we're in a state of life threat. And to quote Resmaa Menakem, who wrote a really beautiful and wonderful book that's very timely in this day and age called My Grandmother's Hands. And it's all about looking at the somatics of racial justice and oppressed bodies in the world and how to heal the trauma that occurs between white bodies, black bodies, and other colored bodies and police bodies. And it's a beautiful, beautiful book, extremely compassionate, really honors the trauma that all the bodies carry and how do we work on changing that. And horse bodies are an oppressed body often, right? They live in captivity and are subjected to human will, right? And so an oppressed body is going to have a very different nervous system experience than a body that has more power and privilege. And so in horse-human relationships, there can often be that power and privilege dynamic that comes from a speciesist or a speciesism perspective, you know, not so much racism, but speciesism. And that affects the nervous system patterning as well and how we are with one another. So let's do a brief overview. You're going to receive this. There's actually a link on my website. If you go to EQUUSOMA.com and click on the upper menu, there's a tab called Free Sources. You can actually download this as a PDF. I have it in international A4 size, and I also have it in letter size, along with a whole bunch of other really cool handouts that you can use with your clients. You can share. Proper citation, of course, is appreciated. I really thank you in advance for that. But there's a pattern in our nervous system, right? So let's just talk a little bit about this really cool graph here. So when we feel safety, so I'll kind of come to this green area first. There's a number of things that are available when we feel safe. And there's a reason why Stephen Porges calls it the transformative power of feeling safe, is that when we feel safe, when an organism feels safe, a number of things become available, right? And so social engagement is possible, relationships are easier, right? The parts of my body and nervous system that are involved in relationship are online, right? So we've got facial expression, we've got good tone of voice, we've got access to all the parts of our brain, we've got a full presence in our body, more or less, you know, and we're able to be in the world, engage in safe and fun ways. We can rest and digest, and we can engage in play and creativity. And so the neuroception of safety doesn't necessarily mean that all is calm. You can have some gas pedal in there. You can have some juice flowing, which is why there's a little bit of yellow in the green. The yellow is like the gas pedal, right? This is sort of safety and social engagement. And within that, we can either be totally asleep to resting and digesting, reading books, you know, praying, meditating, etc., you know, or engaging and having fun, right? This all happens within a neuroception of safety. We can get work done, right? And Porges would call that sustainable physiology, right? This kind of physiology, the body is in a state that is sustainable. This is conducive to good health, right? When we're in these states. And it's conducive to learning as well. When we're feeling safe, the parts of our brain that are involved in learning and memory and recall and what other executive functions around performance and logic and all these kinds of things, that's online when we feel safe, right? Often was where we feel the most present and connected, and secure attachment or earned secure attachment is linked with the neuroception of safety, right? And here is where we also have what we call exploratory orienting, which is where I can orient to my environment and notice the good stuff. I can notice the resources, the novelties, the things that are there that I'm drawn to, what I'm attracted to, the beauty, right? The fun. It's curious, right? Curiosity is supported here. When we start to feel a neuroception of danger, right, then we start to see a number of things kick in. So why there's some green in the yellow is because the green represents in part social engagement. And so when we head into yellow and we feel unsafe, often we will start by turning to our social survival strategies first. And often those social survival strategies are either what I call, or actually a colleague of mine, Lascelle Bartlett, came up with a term for me. I said, can you find another F word for me? I'm trying to follow the F theme, you know, fight, flight, freeze, fawn, but there's more than those. And I said, can we find one for when we want to turn to our attachment figures for security, for closeness, for proximity, like that what we call attachment cry, when I'm seeking connection with the other, what's a good word for that? And she's like, let's call that find. I'm like, I like that. So when we start to feel in danger, often a mammal, horse or human, will turn towards its security figures, its attachment figures, its herd, its group, its family for security, comfort, reassurance, etc., protection. Okay. When there are no safe others to turn to, we usually go into fawn. So fawn responses are when we use our social engagement skills to try to appease, placate, negotiate, you know, the potential source of harm, so that things come back down and we fall into a state of safety again, or we reduce harm. And sometimes finding is not available. Fawn is not really serving us any benefit. It's not really working. So we often will also flight or fight. We can flee or fight. And so either try to run away or fight if we cannot. Sometimes if we can't flight or flee, we will fawn, right? And especially infants, young mammals can't really fight or flee. So all they really have is find, and they go into their call, their attachment call. And when none of this works, like when this is not happening, when we're not able to get that to come back down to safety from here, you know, within the yellow zone, then sometimes if it gets overwhelming and continues to rise, then we get up here, and then there's going to be a sense of terror or overwhelm where we go into all those other F's that we know about: freeze, also known as fright; fold, which is also known as flag, which refers to collapse or surrender; flag of surrender, which is why that's there. This depends on who you're reading. Different people use different terms meaning the same thing. Fainting, feigning death, or fragment. Fragment is that sort of splitting of personality states. So the distinction between neuroception of danger and neuroception of life threat, and this is just Porges's wording, in neuroception of danger, that's where we're mobilizing, right? We're mobilizing into action, and we're defensive orienting. Where are the threats? Where are the escape routes? Where are my resources? You know, there's a sense of I can, right? We're building in the body in terms of action. We might be present and connected to varying degrees. If we live in this state of neuroception of danger in relationships, there would be evidence of insecure attachment, right? Because the relationship gives an experience of danger, a neuroception of danger. And this is what Porges and others will call survival physiology. So survival physiology is that fight or flight responses in the body, right? I'm revved up, right? This is all the energy is into action. And up here is almost like what happens when action is not possible, regardless of if the action is towards relationship, in relationship, or moving away from relationship, so to speak. When that's not working, then we've got conservation physiology. That's when we shut down, right? And then we are disoriented usually. There's a sense of I can't, I'm immobilized. It's different from the immobilization that happens down here. This is sort of safety. When we feel safe and we're mobilized, that's calm. That's rest, digest, you know, just being, right? Immobilization down here feels very different from immobilization up here, because not all stillness is calm in a nervous system. And so we've got, we might find dissociation, a state of disconnection. This also would be people and horses who live up here, and they may experience insecure attachment also when they're in conservation physiology. And just as a small side point, we can dissociate in a neuroception of danger, and we can dissociate in a neuroception of safety also, right? So sometimes you're driving your car and you just check out and tune out and don't realize you've made it through the last 4 intersections, even though clearly you've gotten through safely. And it's not because you've checked out because you have driving trauma behind the wheel. That would be different. You might be somewhere up here when you're driving, but someone who legitimately feels safe on the road may just go into that highway hypnosis, right? It's a form of dissociation. Neuroception of danger, we can dissociate here as well. Thinking about like blind rage or acting and not remembering what you've done as you act, right? So it's, and then, you know, when we come down the other side of this graph and move through the immobility response, which is what Peter Levine talks about, and is the goal of an approach called somatic experiencing, is to, how do we renegotiate this patterning, come down through and back down again. So some questions are like, you know, where are you in this graph, in this, what we might call an activation cycle? And you might not experience all portions or segments of the cycle. You can actually, you know, live here, you can be here a lot of the time, you might be up here. Everyone's a little different, but it's interesting to start to pay attention to what state is your nervous system in when you're with your horse. What state is the horse's nervous system in when it's with you? They may be very different. This is where the word co-regulation is so important, because co-regulation implies a 2-directional process. Co-regulation is when parent and child, or caregiver and child, are engaging, you know, and baby's crying, parent comes, picks up baby, you know, or caregiver comes, picks up baby, baby starts to soothe because caregiver is, you know, taking care of baby. As baby soothes, parent feels soothed, right? So although the parent has the ideally more regulated nervous system, and is more available for the infant, but as the infant settles, the parent's nervous system also settles further as well. And that pinging back and forth is what supports the bonding of attachment to occur. It's always 2-directional, right? I soothe you, you calm, I feel calmer, and it comes back and forth like this. And so you might feel safe around your horse, or you might feel calm around your horse, but your horse experiences you from up here, right? But we can't call that co-regulation, right? Something else might explain what's going on there. But if a horse is so still that they're actually a little checked out, and then we're feeling calm in relation to that, that would not be congruent with the term co-regulation. So that's co-regulation, again, is when the pinging is occurring, right? Is when the states are there. So some things to be curious about, right? What are you aware of in your nervous system? Thinking about that graph, like, can you check in with yourself when you leave the house to go see a horse, whether it's a horse that you work with or it's your own horse, you know, on your drive to the farm, when you get to the farm, when you approach the paddock or pasture, when you approach a horse, or you're interacting with the horse on the ground or in a saddle. Each of these little steps of the way may have a different nervous system set of nuanced hues, right? The colors of the palette of your nervous system may vary in each of these situations, right? And in each of these situations, perhaps not when you leave the house to go see the horse, unless your horse is already at your house, but what do you notice happening in the horse's nervous system? What states are you experiencing together? How are your nervous systems with each other, right? And then a question that is always interesting to connect with is what supports you both to come back into the green zone of sustainable physiology and a neuroception of safety. Kind of like this, when we started today, I asked you to notice what supports you to be present, what supports you to feel comfortable, and what changes in your body when you notice that. And so these will be some questions to sit with as we continue with this material. So we've got one stuff piece left that I wanted to talk about, which is personality patterns. So, and this is not going to come from personality theory as in, say, Carl Jung or the Myers-Briggs type indicator, like are you an INFJ, you know, that kind of stuff. Or it's not in terms of the Enneagram or true colors or personality. There's another one. I forget what it's called. But really looking at personality in terms of ego states. So, and this is just a small, again, crash course. Each of these are little crash courses, but we all have parts or aspects of ourselves, right, that show up at different times in our lives. And some people call these parts subpersonalities. It depends on the tradition that you come from. There's lots of different models that work with parts. But generally speaking, if I were to summarize all these parts work models, there's protector parts and protected parts. So protector parts are the parts of ourselves that help us manage daily life. And they're either proactive to prevent harm from happening, such as pain from resurfacing, preventing us from getting overwhelmed, preventing us from feeling abandoned, rejected, or shameful, et cetera, et cetera. Or they're reactive in response to harm, potential harm, or in response to protected parts that have come forward. Like, for instance, vulnerability hangover. You've shared too much with someone, and then the next day you go, oh my God, that was so stupid of me. Why did I do that? They're not going to like me, blah, 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 blah. That would be sort of one of those reactive parts that in relation to you having allowed something vulnerable to come forward. Makes sense? And we can live our lives from our protector and protected parts. We can actually live our lives with the protector and protected parts running the show. Our lives may not be very cohesive when that happens. There may be a lot of turbulence and conflict if there isn't a consistent and reliable core or adult self that's available within ourselves. And so let me give you an illustration to give you an example of what this can look like. So one model of parts work that has, and it's by no means the first one, there's many parts work models that pre-existed internal family systems, or IFS. And this is just a model I really like because it's a really straightforward way of categorizing the different aspects of self. And so, and differentiating can be really, really helpful. So there are two categories of protectors. Like I just said, there are protectors that are proactive and protectors that are reactive. So protector parts within IFS are called managers. Those are the proactive parts. Those are the ways that we are in the world that keep things going well, right? And so we might have an inner striver. That's me. Those of you who know me know I've got a real strong achiever part that really pushes and drives me. I've gotten a lot better at not having that part take over so much, which is why if any of you have been trying to reach me on Messenger or email lately, I'm weeks behind, and I'm giving myself permission to not strive so much, not to be irresponsible, but to only get to things as I can get to them because I'm human. Some people have a strong caretaker part. They enter into relationships in a caretaking capacity where their needs are kind of hidden in the background. You know, I'm not going to focus on my needs. I'm going to focus on your needs. And all their relationships in which they show up as a little mini therapist. They show up as a little helper in all their relationships. That would be a manager part. Someone who's said to be, oh, they have control issues. I hate the judgmental language, but the control issues, that would be a part. Needing to be in control all the time is protective, right? Self-criticism is a part, right? Being chronically planning things, you know, to keep things in check, right? Workaholics, a workaholic, that would be someone who lives in their manager part all the time, right? I'm chronically working because it allows me to avoid what's going on at home or my own inadequacy or what have you, right? Exiles are the protected parts. Exiles are the parts that we keep away. right? These are the parts of us that we don't like to touch with a 10-foot pole, the feelings we don't like to acknowledge, the sensations that hurt too much, right? And so these, the more we avoid these, the stronger, the louder they get, and the stronger the manages are to try to keep these in check, right? And so exiles can include things like shame, grief, loss, fear, terror, rage, etc., dependency, right? Longing for connection, various things, whatever was shut down, wasn't able to be available, I'm not allowed to be angry, etc. Those all can be exiles. Those are things that we don't like having come up to the surface. Attachment cry, right? When there's this part of us that's looking for connection, that would be often an exile. We'd often try to dismiss or deny. Firefighters are the other category of protector. They show up when the exiles have come to the surface. It's like, uh-oh, my managers and their best attempts at keeping things under control were not successful, and the exiles come forward. The firefighters try to fight fire with fire, right? So firefighters are often our quick and dirty ways of trying to control what's there. So often addictions, binge eating, suicidal ideation, self-harm, violence, dissociating, etc. And there's more, obviously. And some of these things show up in multiple categories, right? Shame can be a manager where somebody chronically lives in shame, right? Shaming could be a firefighter, and we can shame ourselves for our shame, which can be an exile. So it depends on the role, right? And then in the midst of all of that, there's a self. We all have a core essence that pre-exists all the life stuff, the adversity that's happened. And when we have a good access to our own internal adult, our own internal core self, we can tell because we have access to what Richard Schwartz, who created the IFS model, calls the 8 C's. So we can tell we're in self when we have calm, curiosity, compassion, confidence, creativity, connectedness, courage, and clarity. And when those parts are present, or those experiences are present, usually we can refer to that as being in self energy, right? I'm more connected to myself. I'm not caught up in these parts that are bouncing back and forth between themselves. And so when you're in your relationship with your horse, be curious about what parts of you show up when you're with your horse. What protector parts are present? What protected parts, unmet needs, disowned feelings are there under the surface that you're seeking or wanting to avoid in the relationship with your horse? How much of your core or adult self is available when you're with your horse? Right? Or are you reacting, right? And I've certainly done this before where I've reacted to my horse from, say, my punitive parent part. Something happens and then I get frustrated, and in my own frustration, one of my firefighters is actually, it's kind of like a manager takes over a firefighter role. I don't live from the place of punitive parent, but punitive parent might show up here, and get frustrated, right? We're all human. Right? These moments, we want to sort of reduce these moments or buffer them as best as possible. So these are really important questions. How can I support myself to be in myself when I'm in that relationship with my horse? And this is a bit of a controversial question, but it's an important and an interesting one nonetheless. If you could imagine that your horse had parts, which of its parts show up in relationship with you and your parts, right? If you approach your horse and you're in a particular part, like you're in your controlling part, which part of the horse is accessible or available with you when you're in that part? Does that make sense? Right? So it's not so much about anthropomorphizing, but a horse will have different behaviors and feeling states and needs, et cetera, et cetera. Which of those, if we were to call those the parts of the horse, show up in relation to the parts of us that are present? And then, of course, which begs the question, what supports your horse's core self to be present and available when it's not in a neuroception of danger, when it's not in a neuroception of life threat, when it feels safe and secure and present? What supports that for the horse? So ultimately, what we're looking at here is to shift from what we might call in psychodynamic therapy reenactments to renegotiation, to use language from Dr. Peter Levine. Right? Reenactments are when our stuff and our horse's stuff intersect and get tangled in familiar ways, and they repeat themselves. And the pattern is a pattern that we've experienced since we were a lot younger, and may actually be a pattern that the horse has experienced with past handlers in past contexts as well. And and it continues. And these can be patterns that go back generations, right? This doesn't have to necessarily be within our existing lifetime, but the previous lifetimes before us in our ancestry, you know, the patterning and the epigenetic expectations about relationship affect us moving forward. And so how does all this stuff come together? And so we want to be able to, I was going to talk about a few examples, but I recognize we're a little bit past time. So I want to just sort of wrap up, and maybe we can do a few examples in the questions as we go to end here. But if we're thinking about renegotiation, it means we want to set the conditions for a number of things to occur, right? Both for ourselves and for the horse, or for our clients and for the horses that they are interacting with, whether their own or yours or someone else's. But how can we support corrective emotional, relational, behavioral, and somatic experiences, right? Somatic meaning in the body. How's the body experiencing itself differently in these moments? How can we support relational repair via safe haven and secure-based conditions in relationship? How do we support actual co-regulation and coherence in the shared nervous system experience of MWE, me plus we equals MWE, as Dan Siegel likes to say? And how do we also support more secure and harmonious relationship between ourself and our parts, and others' self and their parts, even if that other self is a four-legged creature? And so these are some questions that I hope you take for yourselves for today, for your own horse-human relationships. Here's a few books for further reading if you're interested. The first one in the list is not yet available for purchase, but it is in press. I'm really excited to announce to you all. The title may change. This is the current title that my editor has accepted, but it may actually shift. Trauma-Informed Interactions with Horses, Creating Safe Havens Through Polyvagal Theory and Practice, should be coming out in 2021. So stay tuned for that. And then a few other books about some of the things we talked about today: In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine, Nurturing Resilience by Kathy Kane and Steve Terrell, and Self Therapy, which is a user-friendly guide to internal family systems therapy by Jay Early. So that's it for today. This is myself. You can get a hold of me through EQUUSOMA.com or sarahschlote.com. And I wanted to just say thank you so much for joining us. This has been a real pleasure to speak to you all today. And I think, Linda, if it's still possible, what I'll do is I will stop the share now, and we'll move into a few questions for those of you who are interested or have any questions for me, and we will go from there. Yeah.
Yep. And if people want to come off video and do it that way too, that's great.
And if everyone's like, okay, I have no questions, I need to go lick and chew and think about this, and that's cool too.
Yes.
So we'll leave that there for just a moment. Linda, how are you doing? How does this material resonate for you?
That's beautiful. Yeah, it really gives me a lot of thought. Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Yeah, it's wish we had all day to listen to you. Sorry, I got distracted there. That's awesome.
It's okay.
Hi, Karen.
Hey, Karen. Hi. Seeing some familiar faces. Lovely.
Good morning.
Good morning, Karen.
I just want to thank you. This just reminds me of I need to be so present when I'm with Gulliver. I need to really be who I am when I show up. And I love the curiosity. Just bringing curiosity to him expands our relationship. It's so amazing.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. And it's really nice to see you. Karen is one of the training assistants for the EQUUSOMA training program. So yeah, so she's in you're still in Colorado, right, Karen?
Yep.
Yeah.
Lovely. Nice.
Lovely.
Welcome.
Yeah. Thanks so much. And Karen offers consultations and personal sessions for those of you who are interested in the EQUUSOMA training program. Karen is one of our approved providers for sessions and consults for exploring somatic experiencing in the horse-human relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Lovely.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Karen.
Congrats.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Anyone else would like to share?
Yeah. If anybody else is on here that wants to come off video, and yes. Hi.
Hi, I'm Mary Joy.
Hi, Mary
It's
Joy.
just a reflection, really, in thinking about this. I call it the soup.
So do
How
I.
Soup. And sometimes the soup is lovely and clear, little bits floating in it, and other times it's like, wow, it's actually a stew or a porridge. And then just because I've worked with groups as well, and then you take it and then suddenly, you know, if you think about the amplification of one-to-one human, then the amplification of one-to-one human and horse or horse herd, and then the amplification again, you know, in group work. I haven't really got a comment on it. It's just like, you know, the wow of what is in the space when that's happening, and then the I suppose I can't think of the right word, but I'm thinking like the obligation as maybe the central point, as perhaps the therapist or the professional in that environment, to really hold your container and really, I talk about weighing anchor, you know, to really drop your anchor when in the middle of a field full of porridge.
A field full of porridge. That's going to be a mental image I carry with me moving forward.
Porridge.
Yes. Yes. And I think porridge actually reflects the thickness of it, because I say soup, like I'm in the soup, I'm knee deep in the soup, or I'm neck deep in the soup. Yeah. And sometimes it's not a soup, it is a porridge. It is heavy and it's thick, and it's like, some people call it being in the reeds. I forget, I don't want to misquote someone. I know that actually belongs to someone as a metaphor, but it's like you're in the reeds, and there's just so much to bring our awareness to. Yeah. Thank you.
I think with the horses, there's an added layer of knowledge.
Yes.
Like when you're dealing with another species, then you're also dealing with that other knowledge of how they react to things and what they are, and that horse behavior and that horse language. So putting all this and adding that layer on top of it,
yeah,
of knowledge. And I know when I've, you know, my past self teaching riding lessons, and it was all of what a person is bringing to it, or a human's bringing to it, but then teaching them that there is those reactions. A horse naturally reacts to this, so that knowledge on top of all of this is,
yeah.
you know.
Well, and all of this that we just talked about assumes that this is also the horse's experience too. Where's the horse on that graph? What's going on in its nervous system? What's going on for its personality? What's going on in terms of its attachment? Like, it's a two-way street, always, always. And if we work in facilitation models or co-facilitation models, some people will be doing that. Co-facilitation models is what's going on with my own stuff, but also the co-facilitator. Because if there's issues with all these pieces in the co-facilitation team, that can set up difficulties with the client and the horse. And if we're not looking after our stuff, you know, that can set up a reenactment where, you know, let's say there's conflict in the co-facilitation team because somebody isn't looking after their own regulation, or somebody's personality parts are kind of taking over, and there's a response within the co-facilitation team that doesn't feel very attuned, or there's just issues there. A client, for instance, can start to feel like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm caught between mom and dad, or, you know, when I was a kid, and now I'm kind of experiencing these co-facilitators and their incongruence and what's going on for that client. And then as a result, what's going on for the horse, or even in the boarding facility environment, is if there's conflict or stuff going on in terms of the boarders, how are their horses interacting with each other? How are their horses in the herd, you know, reflecting what's going on in the relationships with the boarders. And so it can be really, really fascinating to start to look at all the layers, like Joy is saying, that the porridge, the porridge that we're all waiting in.
For sure, absolutely.
Any other points or questions before we go to wrap up for today?
See anything coming through here?
People might be full with their porridge.
It's a lot to digest.
Oh, there's a lot of porridge to eat here. Yes, that's right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well,
Needs coffee on it.
that's right. Well, maybe we can wrap up there. That might be a good place for us to wrap up here,
I
Linda.
think
is,
so. I
you
think
know,
so.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
lot of food for thought.
Yep.
Speaking of the porridge theme. And
Yeah.
if people want to know more or learn more, I do teach this stuff online. The EQUUSOMA training is very much, we go into this a lot more. So if you want to learn more about it, feel free to take a look at the website. The link will be below in YouTube. We'll make sure that stuff is there and that the handouts are there too.
Awesome.
So,
Well, thank you, Sarah. This has been fascinating and enlightening, inspiring. Your questions, I think, were perfect and made us all sort of go, oh yeah, what about that? You know, that bit about, you know, with the horses that we all think about mirrors, as opposed to there is a relationship going on there no matter what. So it's, you know, some of that was very, those aha moments were great.
cool.
Susanna, do you have a question or comment?
And Susanna, if you have any questions about the training, I would certainly contact me through EQUUSOMA.com. Contact information is on there, and just reach out that way if you have any specific questions. I'll be more than happy to answer if you want to learn a little bit more.
Thank you. Yeah, as I was asking, you were kind of answering. So
okay, perfect. Good stuff. Sure.
That's a good relationship right there.
There you go. Perfect. Attunement. Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks again. Thanks for a great morning.
And so just to wrap up a bit, guys, I realized at our first session this week, and some of you have heard this already, but that we're creating networks here, and we're having these inspiring sessions, but we're all meeting each other too. So I have a private Facebook group. It's called Humanity Needs the Horses. If you want to head over there, we're going to start the conversation. We're going to keep the conversation going. People can introduce themselves, connect with each other. As far as any of these sessions, they'll be posted later on today on YouTube with any information in them. So I'll talk to Sarah afterwards about that, and we'll put that up hopefully later on today. So thank you all. Sarah, final words?
Yeah, feel free to check out also. So there's that group, and there's EQUUSOMA. There's an EQUUSOMA Facebook page and group as well. So we can have more of these conversations with like-minded folks. So feel free to send in a request, and Linda and I will add you in.
Absolutely. Great.
Right.
Thank you all for being here. And it's lunchtime here, and get ready for the second session today. So thank you, Sarah.
Everyone. Yeah, take care. Yeah, bye-bye.
Still there?